Mangione pleading guilty to federal stalking charges resulting in the death of United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson, who was shot and killed outside a hotel in Midtown Manhattan in December of 2024. This case making nationwide headlines and sparking debate about America's healthcare system. That plea coming just weeks before his state murder trial. He has pleaded not guilty to second-degree murder in that case. Mangione had considered pleading guilty to federal charges once before and then backed out. Mangione could now face life in prison. It's still unclear how this federal guilty plea might impact the state trial, although it likely complicates the district attorney's case. Mangione's attorneys have already tried to dismiss the state murder charges on the grounds of double jeopardy. Well, the Manhattan District Attorney's Office says it is ready to move forward. Jury selection in that trial is set to begin September 8th. Let's get right to our chief investigative correspondent, Aaron Katersky. He's outside court there in New York City. Aaron, you were in that courtroom. Mangione actually spoke in court, admitted to the murder, and this was also the first time that we've ever seen Paulette, Brian Thompson's widow, in person. This had to be gut-wrenching for her to hear Mangione confirm that he indeed killed her husband.
After nearly 2 years of maintaining he was not guilty of killing Brian Thompson, Luigi Mangione sat at the defense table, cropped hair, stubble on his face, beige jail uniform, and admitted to a federal judge, "I shot Brian Thompson in Manhattan and he died." He said that he stalked Brian Thompson after learning there would be an investor conference for United Healthcare. He didn't know the exact location, Kira. He said he emailed United Healthcare posing as an investor with $50 million in capital so that he could learn it would be at a hotel in Midtown Manhattan. And from there, it's Mangione seen on video shooting Brian Thompson in the back. Thompson said he used a 3D printer to make the murder weapon himself. This was, as you say, Kira, gut-wrenching for Brian Thompson's family. They have never been to court until today. His widow, Paulette, seen weeping as Mangione entered and the hearing began. And then to hear him admit, after all of this time, that he shot her husband, it was too much, and she was consoled by other members of her family.
Wow. Let's bring in our legal analyst, Brian Buckmeyer. Brian, what does this all mean for Mangione now? And what can you tell us about this judge?
Yeah, so the judge in federal court has now taken the guilty plea from Mangione, and from what I'm hearing is the next sentence date would be December 18th of this year, almost 2 years after Brian Thompson was gunned down, and a lot longer, a lot past when the state court is set to do a trial. Now, as I understand, this judge has a phenomenal background. She, as you can see there, nominated in 2023, but to go even further, she was in the AUSA, or the Southern District of New York, as a prosecutor for many years. She was actually the chief of violent crimes from 2011 to 2014, as well as the chief of appeals from 2016 to 2017. She knows these types of cases. She understands the type of punishment that could be handed out, that should be handed out, and would survive appeal. It's a very broad spectrum in terms of what Luigi Mangione could be facing. A mandatory minimum of 0 years in prison, but as high as life in prison, and they're leaving this all up to the judge to kind of decide what should happen here.
And Brian, we should point out that this wasn't just a stalking charge, as we usually know a stalking charge and you file a restraining order. This was stalking that resulted in death. So let's talk about that for a minute, and also how today's decision will impact the state case.
Yeah, so in federal court, if you're charged or convicted of stalking, the sentence is actually, I believe, 0 to 5 years. But if stalking occurs and there are greater injuries like serious harm, serious injury, or in this case, death, those maximums rise. And so it becomes a possibility of life in prison. So the judge is going to look at this and say, this isn't just stalking, it's stalking that involves death. And we'll look at that in terms of appropriate sentencing. Now, as it applies to the state case, I think the play here is, and I say this as a defense attorney, and it kind of makes sense to me. Resolve the federal case. Try to get a good offer, because by the time he gets sentenced, Mangione's already been in prison for 2 years. That's 24 months. Maybe you get a sentence in the middle of 0 to life, maybe somewhere around 12, 15 years, maybe less if you think you can do so. That way, you can get a very good deal overall in federal court, stay in federal prison, and try to make the double jeopardy argument that popped up in one of the rulings in state court and try to get the state case to go away. That would mean that Mangione was facing death at one point, and if the defense does this right, which I think is a long shot and a bit of a Hail Mary, they could be looking at single digits in prison, and that would be a win for them.
And I understand we have live pictures now over the scene there in New York, over the courthouse. You can see the number of people that turned out pretty early to be there for decision day. Aaron, Brian Thompson sure had a lot of support in that courtroom, but what about Mangione? Was his family inside court?
Almost no support for Luigi Mangione on such a monumental day as he admits to shooting and killing Brian Thompson. Members of his family did not appear to be in court. They've never been in court for any of the proceedings so far. And Kira, there were a few of his supporters who show up consistently, but none of them were very advertent. They can't wear T-shirts, buttons, anything that identifies them as a Mangione supporter in federal court. So the atmosphere was more muted than we've seen it outside. It does not appear to be very many of Mangione's supporters here, not like in the past when we've seen signs and chanting, megaphones, none of that, as Mangione now admits that he stalked and killed Brian Thompson. He did say, Kira, that he had suffered for years with severe back pain. He said that he came to understand the suffering that people go through with the healthcare system. He was never a client of United Healthcare. He had a different insurance company. So this guilty plea certainly resolves the charges, but it doesn't fully explain why he ended up doing this, why United Healthcare, why Brian Thompson, other than he learned there would be an investor conference and he duped the company to learn its exact location.
Aaron Katersky, Brian Buckmeyer, thank you both. And our coverage will continue on ABC News Live and abcnews.com. We are going to return to local programming now. We'll have a full wrap-up on world news tonight. I'm Kira Phillips, and I'll see you back over on ABC News Live.
This has been a special report from ABC News.